The real problem with Rings of Power is not because it necessarily goes against the spirit of Tolkien's legendarium. Don't get me wrong, if done poorly, like it seems to be here in this divisive show, then yeah, diversity itself does not necessarily offend the spirit of Tolkien's legendarium, because he does take elements from various cultures, and he does reference non-European inspired cultures. And the story of The Lord of the Rings itself does emphasize several different fantasy races joining together as the good guys fighting against a monolithic Dark Lord trying to uniformize everyone under his stifling tyranny. It is about a diverse crew of good guys fighting against hordes of same-looking dudes. Even though Tolkien was indeed seeking to build a mythology for England, and Tolkien himself was the quintessential British gentleman, and good thing too, because these guys write all the best stories. I mean, the different folk of Middle-earth are already very diverse, in size, bone structure, anatomy, and facial features, and Tolkien did include non-European looking cultures that could be explored in a prequel to The Lord of the Rings. You could bring in characters from other geographical regions that Tolkien wrote about, though some of the folk in his stories should definitely be European, or even quintessentially British, like the Hobbits of the Shire or the Rohirrim. I mean, come on. It would, in fact, be disrespectful to portray these specific peoples as anything other than English, since I have lived in Yorkshire, and I can tell you, they are the closest thing to real hobbits up there, and they're awesome. Just a wonderful place to live. And the Rohirrim were Tolkien's idealized Anglo-Saxon warriors pre-Norman invasion. But I'd say that showing more men from Harad in your story, or other geographical regions, and having them be some of the important characters of the cast, isn't bad, if it fits the story, and if you are depicting an age that Tolkien was vague about in his writings, where you have more room to do this kind of thing. As long as it is a good story, it shouldn't be a problem, and it can even show how massive Tolkien's world is, and even expand on his world building. But you have to abide by his rules. If you're doing it for ideological reasons, though, then chances are it's gonna be terrible, and even non-white people will hate it. And many non-white Tolkien fans aren't actually pleased with this forced diversity in this current show, by the way. As for my bros, the Gondorians, my favorite faction in the whole Legendarium, I personally think it's fine to make them Mediterranean-ish. Like the Romans, maybe? Since they are technically a southern empire. So having pasta-loving Gondorians walking around Middle-earth going, "The orca touching my spaghetti," is in fact very appealing to me. But yeah, diversity in Lord of the Rings can be an awesome way to show how massive Tolkien's world really is, especially if you bring far travelers that wander into the action of the story, like a Haradrim pilgrim or something. And yes, I am partial to pilgrims. However, within the crap storm of our current international culture, this forced diversity in Amazon's Lord of the Rings show is terrible, and here's why. Over the recent years, whenever there is even perceived whitewashing of characters that are supposed to be from non-European cultures, there's always a massive amount of complaining, anger, and backlash. Sometimes it's not even whitewashing. Just by having a white guy walking around in your story is seen as oppressive somehow and white savior-ish in some extremely hysterical cases. But when a Chinese director of a Chinese movie casting Matt Damon to try to appeal to Westerners only to have retarded first-world professional complainers accuse a Chinese studio of anti-Asian racism just because he casted a white guy for America points in his movie, that's just a hilarious indication of Western oikophobia. Also, don't forget, Gods of Egypt, Exodus, etc. People complained about white actors depicting Egyptian gods and characters. People threw a fit, as they also did when Hollywood cast a Mediterranean woman to play Cleopatra, who was also Mediterranean, by the way. But historically illiterate types didn't realize that actually Cleopatra was of European origin. My point is, if The Lord of the Rings was centered around Asian, African, or Middle Eastern cultures, and Amazon was casting European actors into these roles, in this day and age, there would be backlash and hell from these university ideologue types that run Hollywood, and we all know it. If not maintaining some sort of cultural purity is disrespectful to certain cultures, like say Asian cultures, for instance, then why is it not disrespectful here with the English or European culture? And of course, diversity itself isn't disrespectful. I'm fine with adaptations becoming either more diverse or authentic to the original culture. Whatever direction we decide to take, it's fine. We just need a consistent and universal principle to apply to all cultures. and all works of fiction. This is important for us to establish. Either it doesn't matter, and everyone can cast whoever they want in whatever role, or it is important and we need to be faithful to the cultural spirit of the original work. If it's disrespectful to make Katara a white chick, then surely it's disrespectful to ethnicity swap characters here in The Lord of the Rings, right? Here we see the Netflix live-action adaptation of Avatar The Last Airbender being praised for its faithful depiction to the culture it portrays and having no one from outside that cultural sphere casted, not even a black actor. But then a seminal English work meant to be an Englishman's tribute to his own people and culture is seen as needing people from other cultural spheres? Why? Well, okay, I am willing to accept that diversity is good and promotes harmony, but only with a universally applied set of rules. So let's see ginger-haired Wakandans, right? Or maybe some Italian Earth Kingdom citizens making pizza in Ba Sing Se. The finest pizza in the Ba Sing Se. We keep having these ridiculous fights and culture wars every time one of these adaptations come out, precisely because the rules are undefined. Or when they are defined, they are purposely skewed against European authenticity. And why? The Europeans were insensitive to others in the past, so it's payback to be insensitive to them now? That's a dangerous line of thinking. If we want to stop culture wars, which we should, then a universally applied set of rules that goes for all peoples and all cultures is what is necessary. That's how we will see more compromises and less bickering, even if not everyone is happy with the rules. If they are applied to everyone, there is still a sense of universal respect. Like, okay, there's a black gentleman who is an elf, but we also see a white guy who is a Wakandan, so sure. But right now, in 2022, the rules are not universal. Non-European works of fiction, or even franchises made by white people depicting non-white cultures, must be as authentic as possible to the cultures depicted, especially the ethnicity of the characters. While Western works are usually forced to adhere to a more diverse standard and often have to sacrifice cultural authenticity, like for instance the controversy surrounding God of War. And sometimes, we even see some white characters have their ethnicity swapped for random reasons. And hilariously, it doesn't even please some of the people of the culture and ethnicity that the main character was swapped into. And again, I can't stress this enough. I personally don't care which standard we adhere by, whether authenticity is important or diversity is important. I see both sides, even if I prefer the former. What I care about is the universal application of the standard so that it becomes clear that all cultures are respected with the same treatment. If diversity is good, then I guess we all need it, right? What, you don't want only Europeans to have this privilege, right? Selective application like this just indicates that the authenticity of some cultures are more valued than others, or at least that's the message being given here. To be honest, both the authenticity or diversity causes both have good arguments behind them. Authenticity believes in adherence to the context and original vision of the author from his or her specific culture, adapting the work closely to what the author intended, and since you are using his or her name, you may as well have a duty to be faithful to what they were trying to say. Otherwise, you are putting words in their mouths. While on the other hand, diversity might be good to appeal to an international market, to try and represent your diverse customers, or maybe spread a message of general inclusion to spread the idea that we're all in this together, etc. However, the problem with the diversity argument is that it has to be universally applied, because if it's not, then you run into the risk of actually making it seem like you are attacking one specific cultural identity by disregarding its authentic representation. Take this example for instance. If only I have to compromise with my house and give everyone else rooms in my house, but other people can keep their own houses locked to me, then it just feels like I am losing space in my own home and I am losing ownership of my own place, and everyone else is taking it from me. But if we all open our houses to each other and we can all move into each other's spaces at will, then it feels like we are all gaining more space and more room. So this diversity mentality has to be universally applied. This is important. Again, we are in an international cultural sphere now. When it comes to entertainment, we need to set up universal rules to stop all the fighting. Either Zuko can be played by a ginger kid in the Avatar live-action show, or the dwarves should look Scottish, okay? No selective application of the standards. One standard to rule them all. You get me? But I know that such a universal standard can't really be applied internationally. Look at Japan. They cast Japanese actors to what are obviously meant to be German roles all the time. Even putting blonde wigs on some of these actors, which is pretty funny actually. And that's fine. But that's because Japanese cinema is another territorial sphere entirely. It's normal that they would have their own standards. I'm not saying that all the entertainment industries of every nation need to follow a legalized standard codified by the UN, who will force, I don't know, Nigerian filmmakers in their own country to cast non-Nigerian actors or something. That'll be a disaster of an international bureaucracy. My point is, at least in the Western sphere, it should be universally applied. These days, we all know that the West is in fact attacking its own authentic representation while favoring others. Again, this is probably due to oikophobia. And there is in fact this twisted idea running around in universities, which I've seen personally, that states that depicting other cultures must be authentic when it comes to fiction, but European properties must have its identity deconstructed in order to end supremacist systems of oppression or whatever, but that's just not a good argument. We don't live in a white-dominated world anymore. There are several entertainment industries, especially from Asia, which are taking over. Bollywood, Chinese cinema, K-pop, K-dramas, and especially anime are in fact giving their Western counterparts some serious competition. Also, geopolitically, Western dominance is declining quickly in our lifetimes. We're seeing it in real time. The future great powers will probably be multipolar. America will also be a great power in 50 years probably, and it might even still be the greatest power, but it will probably be just one of many. And I'm not pulling this stuff out of my ass. This is a well-established theory of geopolitics, and a very accepted one in fact.
That we today operate in a multipolar world. We have left behind the unipolar world. The United States was by far the most powerful state on the planet, and that unipolar world existed from roughly 1990 to 2017. Almost everybody in the audience grew up in the unipolar world. You want to understand that world is gone. We're now in a multipolar world. And in that multipolar world, there are three great powers, obviously, the United States, China, and Russia. And of those three great powers, the United States is by far the most powerful, and China is, at this point in time, a peer competitor of the United States.
The Great Red Dragon. But said dragon might actually fall apart in 20 to 30 years because of several issues like demographic collapse or whatever. And it might fall, it might not, but the fact is, this dragon is dominating the international pop culture right now. The West has been compromising its own values for the dragon, and even putting Chinese actors in prominent roles for pretty much a decade at this point. If you think about it, Hollywood has actually been the dragon's puppy girl for the entire lifetime of some edgy kids in middle school. Some American kids have only known a world where the dragon censors their American media. And I know this personally. Proof of the dragon's power is that one of my few demonetized videos is one where I lightly criticize the dragon. Google, which is an American company, loves it when I critique the United States. But one mild criticism of the dragon and I lose income? The fact that an American tech company, an incredibly important one at that, is submitting itself to an American rival is actually very terrifying. White-dominated world my ass. I have to censor myself for my communist red dragon masters, which is why I've been saying dragon this whole time. I'm not trying to offend anybody, it's just I need to use coded language. Hopefully, my audience members who are from that geographical region will forgive me. I'm not trying to be a dick or offensive. I'm sure you understand. I don't want to be demonetized again, but I probably will, I don't know, let's see. Anyway, these loud internet and university ideologues claiming that we live in a Eurocentric world are in fact operating off of outdated information. The world they describe is not in fact the world that we are actually living in anymore. So no, being biased against European works of fiction and violating their authenticity while protecting everyone else's authenticity is in fact not justified. And yeah, I know that the whole thing is complicated. Cowboy Bebop is a Japanese work which Netflix decided to put to the same standards as many Western works these days and put some diversity in the cast.
Also, I had to add this because it was really bothering me while I was making this video. One specific type of movie that really needs more diversity, not for ideological reasons, but just out of respect to real people who fought and died, would be World War I and World War II movies. A lot of these movies don't actually portray a lot of the African or Indian soldiers who fought for their respective European empires during these terrible wars. For instance, I haven't seen a World War I or World War II movie that really paid any tribute to the divisions of Indian soldiers of the British Empire, for instance. So that's a case of where you would insert more diversity in an English context, definitely. This is actually a moral imperative, in my opinion. These men deserve to be honored for their sacrifice. Lord of the Rings, though, is a mythology made by an Englishman for his English people, so it's different. Also, this is what I'm personally doing. I'm actually writing a graphic novel, which is an alternative history to World War I, and I am trying to honor these men who are African and Indian who fought in these wars. So I am putting my money where my mouth is, literally my money, because it's expensive to make these things. Anyway, on with the rest of the video.
But yeah, I know it's complicated. And Asian authenticity in Hollywood, for instance, isn't always 100%, which is why we have some YouTubers who can make an entire career complaining that Hollywood fails at authentic Asian representation. But Hollywood is still trying very hard to have authentic Asian representation, while they call anyone who demands that they be faithful to an Englishman's work of fiction to be racists. Hollywood hires Chinese experts, while they fire token experts. You can't tell me you're not noticing this. There are, in fact, social forces at play here that are, in fact, pushing one standard for anything depicting non-European cultures and another standard depicting European culture. And it's pulling us apart and making us bicker every time one of these things come out. Remember, it matters less what we decide. Authenticity or diversity. What matters more is that we have one universal standard so that no culture feels picked on. Personally, I prefer authenticity because I see it as a means to maintain the voice or intent of the original author, who actually created the damned thing, whether the author is European or Asian or African. But I don't really care if there is diversity in the adaptations that I watch, as long as it is fairly applied. Look at me, Pilgrim here, getting more controversial and into the pop politics. Yeah, I don't really like discussing these things that often. I prefer more of a political theory and political science more than current day politics, especially identity politics. But so far I haven't seen the specific argument that I've made being done. And I think that we should just ask for a universal standard, I think that's the key. And I'm just trying to promote a conversation here. I'm not really trying to be offensive or anything like that. I might use some humor and I might be callous in my word choices, but I'm not really trying to trigger anyone. I'm just trying to convey my perspective. And even if you disagree, but you like what I'm trying to do in promoting a conversation, then consider liking, subscribing, and sharing. But am I wrong? Are things not really one-sided these days? Am I just having white fragility or whatever it is that woman talks about? Feel free to let me know down in the comments. And if you do in fact provide convincing arguments, I will change my mind. By the way, when I tried writing a book and I published it in this tiny Quebecois publishing house years ago when I was trying to be a writer, my main character was in fact of North African Moorish ancestry. Yeah, that was my protagonist, though he did have a Germanic Scandinavian name because of his cultural context. But that's literally another story. But yeah, if you accuse me of disliking diversity, you can rest easy knowing that you are wrong about me. Oh, and before I forget, o mal não consegue criar nada de novo, só consegue distorcer e destruir o que foi inventado ou feito pelas forças do bem. J.R.R. Tolkien. Thank you all for listening to my ramblings. Have a good day, my friends.